Your mind cannot sit with a feeling that has no shape. It can't hold something formless. When anxiety rises inside you, when that tight, restless electric feeling starts moving through your body, your mind immediately goes to work. It scans your life. It looks for a reason. It needs one. And it will find one. It always does. Maybe it grabs the conversation you had with your boss yesterday. Maybe it finds the credit card bill sitting on the counter. Maybe it lands on the relationship that hasn't been feeling right lately. Maybe it locks onto something you said in a group chat 3 days ago that you're still quietly replaying. And once it finds that thing, it says, "There. That's why you're scared. That's the problem. Focus on that." And you believe it. Of course you believe it. Because the mind is incredibly convincing. It feels like logic. It feels like clarity. You think, okay, I'm anxious because of this specific thing. If I can fix this, the anxiety goes away. So you start working on it. You think about it more. You plan responses. You run through scenarios. You try to anticipate every possible way it could go wrong so you can prepare. And hours later, you look up and realize, the anxiety is still there. Maybe it's even worse. Because you were solving the wrong problem. The target your mind chose. It wasn't the source. It was a placeholder. Something visible. Something that looked like it could explain the feeling. But the real thing is deeper. And your mind, without you realizing it, would rather keep you endlessly busy chasing the surface than sit still long enough to look at what's underneath. So let's look at what's underneath. In my experience, when you trace anxious fear back far enough, you almost always arrive at one of a few core things. The first, and probably the most common, is the fear of losing control. Not of a specific situation. Not of this particular job or this particular relationship or this particular decision. But of life itself. Of the fundamental uncertainty of being alive in a world where you cannot predict what happens next. Think about how your mind responds when something unexpected happens. Not even something bad, just something unexpected. A plan that changes last minute. A message that arrives at the wrong time. A situation that moves in a direction you didn't anticipate. For a lot of people, that feeling of not being in control, even briefly, even in something small, is genuinely distressing. The body tenses. The mind speeds up. The search for certainty begins immediately. And this is where the loop starts. Because your mind, trying to protect you from the feeling of being out of control, starts working ahead of time. It thinks, if I can just anticipate everything, if I can just think through every possible outcome before it happens, then nothing will catch me off guard. Then I'll always be ready. Then I'll always be in control. So it runs scenarios. It rehearses conversations. It imagines what could go wrong, and then tries to solve those imaginary problems before they even exist. And this feels productive. This feels like preparation. Like you're being responsible, careful, thorough. But what's actually happening is that your mind is expending enormous amounts of energy fighting problems that don't exist yet, and most of which will never exist. And every time it does this, it sends a signal to the rest of your system. The world is dangerous. There are threats. Stay alert. Don't relax. And so you never fully relax. And the exhaustion you feel at the end of every day isn't just from what you did. It's from living inside a mind that spent the entire day managing an invisible emergency that wasn't actually happening. But this isn't the only thing driving the fear. There's another layer underneath this one, and it's quieter, but it cuts even deeper. This one is harder to talk about. Because it requires a level of honesty that most people avoid, not because they're unwilling, but because the fear itself is designed to stay hidden. The second core fear is the fear of not being enough. Not of failing a specific thing, but of what that failure would mean. About who you are. About your worth. About whether the version of yourself you've been presenting to the world is real, or just a performance that's eventually going to fall apart. Let me show you how this actually works. Someone is anxious about a job interview. On the surface, they're afraid of not getting the job. That feels like the fear. But go one layer deeper. Why does not getting the job feel so threatening? Because it might confirm something they already secretly believe about themselves. That they're not capable enough. That they don't really deserve success. That eventually people are going to see through them and realize they were never as competent as everyone thought. The interview is just the surface. The real fear is about identity. About what it means if things don't work out. And when that's the fear underneath, no amount of preparation actually calms you down. You can rehearse the interview 100 times and still feel anxious right up until the moment it starts. Because you're not really preparing for the interview. You're trying to protect yourself from a verdict about who you are. This is why achievement often doesn't bring relief. People hit their goals, the promotion, the relationship, the milestone, and they wait for the relief to come. And sometimes it comes for a moment. And then the fear returns. Because the goal never actually addressed the thing underneath. What's underneath is a quiet, persistent belief that your value is conditional. That you have to keep earning your place. That if you stop performing, if you slip, if you fail in the wrong moment, the world will see what you've always suspected about yourself. That is an exhausting way to live. And for a lot of people, it's the water they swim in every single day without ever realizing it. And then there's a third fear. And this is the one that I believe most people have never even considered, and it might be the most important one of all. Stay with me here, because this one takes a second to land. At some point in your life, maybe when you were young, maybe during a particularly overwhelming period, anxiety hit you hard. Really hard. It was physical. It was intense. It felt like you were out of control, like something was wrong with you, like you couldn't trust your own mind or body. And that experience was frightening. So a part of your mind made a decision. Not consciously. You didn't sit down and choose this. But somewhere deep in your nervous system, a rule got written. We can never let that happen again. That level of overwhelm, that loss of control, that feeling, we need to make sure that never catches us off guard. And so your mind started doing something that felt helpful but was actually making everything worse. It started scanning. Constantly. Looking for early signs of danger. Monitoring your own emotions, your own body, your own thoughts. Watching for anything that might signal that the overwhelming feeling was coming back. And every time it spotted something that looked like a warning sign, it activated. It sped up. It started preparing. The anxiety began producing more anxiety to prevent the anxiety. And the tragic irony of this is that the very act of watching for anxiety, the scanning, the monitoring, the bracing, is itself what keeps the nervous system in a state of low-level activation. It's what keeps you feeling like something is always slightly wrong, like you're always on the edge of something, like you can never fully relax even when nothing bad is happening. Your mind learned to be afraid of its own fear response. And now the whole system is caught in a loop that feeds itself. Every worst-case scenario you run through is not just preparation. It's your mind trying to inoculate itself against feeling caught off guard. Every time you rehearse a painful conversation before it happens, every time you imagine the worst possible outcome of a situation, every time you lie awake going through everything that could go wrong, your mind thinks it's protecting you. But what it's actually doing is practicing anxiety. It's training itself to stay in that state. It's telling the system, over and over again, the world is not safe. You cannot rest. Stay ready. And so you stay ready. Every hour of every day. And you don't even know you're doing it anymore. It just feels like normal. It just feels like how you are. But it doesn't have to stay that way. And understanding this, really understanding it, is the first real step out. Here is something I believe deeply, and I want to say it clearly. The mind cannot heal what it cannot see. As long as you believe your fear is about the bill, you'll keep trying to solve the bill. And there will always be another bill. Another problem. Another situation that triggers the same anxious loop. But when you start to see, really see, that the fear is not about the thing in front of you, but about something much older and much deeper. Something shifts. Not because the insight alone fixes everything. I want to be honest with you here. Understanding something intellectually is not the same as healing it. You can understand every word I'm saying right now and still feel anxious tomorrow morning. But here is what seeing the real fear does. It stops the misdirection. It stops you from pouring energy into solving problems that were never the real problem. When you recognize, this isn't actually about the meeting tomorrow. This is about my fear that I won't be enough. That I'll be exposed. That I'll lose control of how people see me. You stop running in circles. You face something real instead of chasing something invented. And facing something real, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's painful, is infinitely less exhausting than chasing a shadow that changes shape every time you get close to it. There is a relief that comes from finally looking at the right thing. Even if what you see is hard. Because at least now you're in the same room as the actual problem. And that is where real change becomes possible. I don't want to leave you with only insight. I want to give you something you can use. So here is a simple shift that I think can genuinely change how you relate to your own fear. The next time anxiety rises, when you feel that tight, restless, activated feeling, don't immediately ask yourself, what am I afraid of? That question will send your mind straight to the surface. It will grab the nearest target and hand it to you. And you'll spend the next hour thinking about that target instead of addressing anything real. Instead, ask yourself this: what is this fear trying to protect me from? That's a different question. And it leads somewhere different. Because when you ask what the fear is trying to protect you from, you're asking about the layer underneath. You're asking about the core thing the fear believes is at stake. And when you start to answer that, when you say, I think this fear is protecting me from feeling out of control. Or, I think this fear is protecting me from finding out that I'm not enough. Or, I think this fear is protecting me from being caught off guard by an overwhelming feeling. Everything changes a little. Not because the fear disappears, but because you stopped being confused about what it is. You gave it a shape. You gave it a name. And named things are manageable in a way that invisible things never are. Your nervous system doesn't know what to do with a formless threat. It can only stay on high alert and keep scanning. But when you give the fear a name, when you say, I see you, I know what you are, I know what you're trying to do, something in the system settles. Not completely. Not permanently. But enough to take the next breath more easily. And over time, with practice, with patience, with repetition, that small settling becomes something larger. I want to zoom out for a moment before we close, because I think there's something important that often gets missed in conversations about anxiety and fear. Most of the advice that exists for anxious people is about management, about coping, about how to get through the moment when the fear is high. And some of that advice is genuinely useful. But management is not the same as understanding. And understanding is what creates real, lasting change. When you only manage the fear, you're always one bad day away from feeling overwhelmed again. You're always dependent on the technique, the breathing exercise, the distraction, the routine that keeps things just barely under control. But when you understand the fear, when you know what it is, where it comes from, what it believes, what it's trying to protect you from, you're no longer at its mercy in the same way. You can feel the fear rising, and instead of bracing or running or distracting, you can say, I know what this is. I know what you're doing. I don't need to follow you down this road right now. That is a fundamentally different relationship with your own mind. And building that relationship takes time. It takes honesty. It takes a willingness to look at uncomfortable things without immediately running from them. But every person I've seen do that work, every person who has stopped chasing the surface and started looking at the source, has found something surprising on the other side. The fear doesn't disappear, but it becomes smaller, more manageable, less urgent, because it's finally being seen instead of being avoided. And there is something deeply calming about that. Something that no amount of management techniques can replicate. So let me close with this. The fear you feel is real. I want you to hear that clearly. I am not telling you that your anxiety is made up, that you're being dramatic, that you need to just think more positively and everything will be fine. The fear is real. The exhaustion is real. The feeling that your mind never fully rests is real. But the story your mind tells you about why you're afraid, that story is almost always incomplete. You're not afraid of the meeting. You're afraid of what the meeting might reveal about your worth. You're not afraid of the uncertainty. You're afraid of what it feels like to not be in control. You're not afraid of the worst-case scenario you keep imagining. You're afraid of being blindsided by a feeling you don't trust yourself to handle. And your mind, trying to protect you from all of that, runs ahead. It imagines every danger. It prepares for every outcome. It monitors everything. It never fully stops. Not because you're broken. Not because something is fundamentally wrong with you. But because your mind learned, at some point, that this is what keeping you safe looks like. And it has been doing that job faithfully ever since, even when the job is hurting you more than it's helping. The path forward is not about eliminating fear. It's not about becoming fearless. Fear is part of being alive, and it has real value when it's functioning the way it's supposed to. The path forward is about teaching your mind, slowly, with patience and with repetition, that it is okay to lower the guard. That not every uncertainty is a threat. That you are more capable of handling difficulty than you've been giving yourself credit for. That you don't need to predict every outcome to survive what comes. And the first step in that teaching, the very first one, is doing exactly what we did today. Looking at the fear honestly. Not running from it. Not immediately trying to fix it. Just looking. Seeing what it actually is. Naming it. Understanding that the thing it's pointing at is almost never the real thing. And that the real thing, as uncomfortable as it is to look at, is actually something you can work with. Because here's the truth underneath all of this. The moment you stop running from the fear and actually turn around to face it, you will see that it is smaller than it seemed from behind. Every single time. And that changes everything.